Your history teacher probably meant well. Probably. But somewhere between dusty textbooks, lazy shortcuts, and Hollywood doing crimes with costumes, a lot of history facts got smuggled into our brains wearing fake mustaches. Today, we're fixing 32 of them. Inventions that weren't invented, heroes dressed in the wrong centuries, myths that got better marketing than the truth, and famous stories that fall apart the second you poke them with one basic question. 1. George Washington. Carver did not invent peanut butter, even though school summaries have somehow turned him into the sacred pope of sandwich spread. Peanut pastes existed long before Carver was even an idea, including among indigenous peoples in the Americas like the Aztecs and Incas. Carver's real peanut connection was not boom, behold my lunch invention. He promoted peanuts as a useful crop and encouraged crop rotation to help Southern farmers escape total dependence on cotton, which had been bullying their soil for generations. He was an agricultural scientist, teacher, and innovator, not a man who magically unlocked the peanut butter achievement. The myth survives because classrooms adore clean little stories, one genius, one invention, one test question. But Carver's real work was already impressive. Popular memory just threw him into the peanut aisle and said, "Close enough." 2. William Wallace charging into battle in a tartan kilt looks great on screen, but historically, it is costume design committing a felony in broad daylight. Wallace lived in the late 13th century, and the kilt most people imagine belongs to a much later Scotland. Dressing him like that is basically giving Julius Caesar aviator sunglasses because the audience needs to know he is the main character. Medieval Scots wore clothing that actually belonged to their time. Tunics, cloaks, hose, and practical layers for a world without heroic slow motion. The bright Highland tartan look became iconic later. Then, Hollywood shoved it backward because viewers instantly read it as Scotland. Wallace was absolutely real. The movie version is more like medieval fan fiction with dramatic hair, heroic yelling, and a personal war against historical accuracy. 3. Ninjas and samurai were not two separate fantasy species locked in eternal combat, like vampires and werewolves with better weapons. A ninja, or shinobi, was not some mystical anti-samurai shadow creature created specifically to ruin honorable sword moments. It was closer to a job description. Shinobi handled spying, scouting, infiltration, sabotage, and all the sneaky work that warrior poetry preferred to pretend never happened. Many worked for samurai lords, came from warrior families, or were lower-ranking samurai themselves. So the real story was often not samurai versus ninja. It was samurai using stealth specialists, hiring them, or doing similar dirty work when victory required less noble posing and more crawling through darkness. The clean split came later because stories love opposites. Real war was uglier. Samurai could deceive, ambush, spy, and lie because honor is nice, but winning is very persuasive. 4. Marie Curie did not technically discover radioactivity, even if the classroom version often hands her the whole phenomenon like a shiny science trophy. The first big discovery came from Henri Becquerel in 1896, when he noticed that uranium salts gave off strange rays without sunlight or any obvious outside trigger. Then Curie entered the story and did something enormous. She investigated the phenomenon deeply, gave it the name radioactivity, and together with Pierre Curie discovered radioactive elements, including polonium and radium. So Becquerel opened the mysterious door. Curie built an entire scientific mansion behind it. The shortcut version survives because Curie discovered radioactivity is neat, simple, and fits her legendary reputation. But she does not need fake extra credit. She won Nobel Prizes in 2 scientific fields while working in conditions that would make a modern safety inspector start screaming into a helmet. 5. Plague doctors in those terrifying beaked masks were not patrolling the streets during the original Black Death in the 14th century. That famous bird-faced outfit appeared much later, especially in the 17th century during later plague outbreaks in Europe. So when films, games, or lazy stock images slap that mask onto the Black Death, they are missing the date by about 300 years. which is not exactly a tiny calendar oopsie. The beak was meant to hold aromatic substances because many doctors believed disease spread through poisoned or foul air. The idea was medical protection. The final look was haunted crow accountant arriving to audit your soul. The first medieval plague doctors were not dressed like that. Our mental image got hijacked because the mask is just too spooky, too marketable, and far too perfect for posters. Accuracy never stood a chance. 6. Marco Polo did not bring pasta to Italy from China like some medieval noodle messiah returning with sacred carbohydrates. Italy already had pasta before his famous travels. Pasta-like foods existed in the Mediterranean world long before Polo, especially in places shaped by Arab cooking, including Sicily. So he did not come home and reveal the shocking secret that dough can be turned into delicious strips. Italians were not standing around helplessly with flour, waiting for one traveler to save dinner. The legend works because people love clean origin stories. One explorer, one discovery, one dramatic food handoff. But real culinary history is messier. Dishes grow through trade, migration, climate, local grains, tools, taste, and centuries of hungry people experimenting. Polo may have described foods he saw in Asia. He did not create Italian pasta culture. The myth is catchy. The truth is slower, tangled, and much less eager to give one guy credit for lunch. 7. Mussolini made the trains run on time is less a fact and more propaganda wearing a conductor's hat. Italy's railways had already improved before Mussolini took power, and under fascism, the trains still had delays, inefficiency, and plenty of bad management. What Mussolini actually made run smoothly was the image of efficiency. His regime controlled newspapers, crushed critics, and sold dictatorship as a magical order machine that produced discipline, neat uniforms, and punctual transportation. That message worked abroad because authoritarianism always advertises itself the same way. Sure, freedom disappears, but please admire how tidy everything looks. The myth is dangerous because it makes fascism sound like strict management instead of a violent system built on repression. The real miracle was not the rail schedule. It was the branding. Fascism was much better at controlling the story than controlling the trains. 8. Napoleon gets blamed for a lot. And honestly, he did not exactly spend his life being subtle. But he did not shoot the nose off the great Sphinx with a cannon. That accusation is old gossip with a French accent glued on later. Drawings and descriptions from before Napoleon was even born already show the Sphinx without its nose. So unless he squeezed time travel into his campaign schedule, this one is not on him. The damage likely happened centuries earlier. One famous story blames a 15th century Muslim iconoclast who supposedly attacked the statue after seeing people making offerings there, though historians still debate the details. The main point is simple. The nose was gone long before French troops reached Egypt. Napoleon invaded the region, yes, but he did not personally renovate the Sphinx's face. That poor statue had already suffered enough before Europe's most intense overachiever showed up. 9. Joan of Arc was not running across battlefields like a medieval action star, personally turning enemies into inspirational confetti. Her real role was less sword-swinging blockbuster and more complicated, powerful, and honestly more impressive. She wore armor, carried a banner, encouraged soldiers, advised commanders, and became a living symbol of divine support for the French cause. Contemporary evidence does not show her as a frontline kill machine, stacking bodies for dramatic effect. Her power came from morale, legitimacy, timing, and the shocking impact she had on soldiers and nobles who should have dismissed her instantly. That is not a downgrade. A teenage girl with no formal military training helped change the energy of a brutal war because people believed she carried a sacred mission. The sword myth survived because it is easy to film. Joan's real weapon was symbolic power, and it rattled a kingdom. 10. Samurai did not spend every battle having elegant katana duels, while cherry blossoms politely floated in the background like nature's own music video. The katana mattered, but on many battlefields it was often a sidearm, backup weapon, or status symbol, rather than the main tool of war. Bows, spears, and polearms did much of the serious work. Early samurai were strongly associated with mounted archery, and later armies relied heavily on long weapons because stabbing someone before they can stab you is not cowardice. It is basic battlefield mathematics. The katana became the supreme icon later, especially in more peaceful periods when the sword became central to samurai identity. It also looked fantastic in art, theater, and film. Spears, unfairly, had terrible public relations. Real samurai used swords, absolutely. But real battles were arrows, mud, shouting, spears, confusion, and far fewer graceful movie poses. 11. The Aztecs probably did not look at the Spanish and calmly announce, "Ah yes, returning gods with beards, boats, and deeply suspicious manners." That story was shaped later, especially by Spanish-influenced accounts that made the conquest seem mystical, inevitable, and very flattering to the invaders. Convenient, right? The Aztecs were not naive background characters dazzled by facial hair. They ruled a complex empire and understood that these strangers were dangerous human beings. The conquest happened through violence, disease, alliances, political rivalries, internal tensions, and chaos on a horrifying scale. They thought Cortés was a god. Myth makes Spanish victory look almost divinely approved instead of brutally opportunistic. Indigenous enemies of the Aztec Empire, especially groups with very real reasons to hate its domination, played a massive role. The empire did not fall because everyone got hypnotized by prophecy. It fell because history is complicated, vicious, and full of people exploiting old wounds. 12. Martin Luther probably did not storm up to a church door and hammer the 95 Theses onto it like an angry theological rock star dropping his first album. The famous scene has surprisingly weak contemporary evidence. It may have happened in some quieter academic form, since church doors could work like notice boards, but the dramatic hammer moment is probably exaggerated. What matters more is that Luther sent the theses to church authorities, including the Archbishop of Mainz, and the text spread quickly through print. That was the real explosion. Not one heroic strike of metal on wood, but an argument entering a media machine ready to copy, circulate, and amplify it. The door story survives because it gives the Reformation the perfect opening scene. One monk, one hammer, one rebellion. Real history, annoyingly, prefers letters, printers, bureaucracy, and paperwork causing absolute mayhem. 13. The Mona Lisa is now treated like the supreme celebrity of art, protected by glass while crowds gather to stare at her, as if she might reveal Wi-Fi passwords. But for centuries, it was admired without being the most famous painting on Earth. Then in 1911, Italian handyman Vincenzo Peruggia stole it from the Louvre, and the media did what the media always does when given a perfect scandal. It went feral. Newspapers around the world turned the theft into a sensation. People even visited the Louvre just to look at the empty wall where the painting had been, which is basically sightseeing for absence. When the painting was recovered, it returned as more than a Renaissance portrait. It became an international legend. Theft gave it a publicity campaign no museum could afford. After that came reproductions, jokes, postcards, tourism, and pop culture worship. The Mona Lisa became globally famous partly because someone stole it badly enough to make everyone care. 14. The Spanish flu almost certainly did not start in Spain, which makes the name a spectacularly unfair historical insult. One major theory points to Kansas in the United States, although scholars still debate the exact origin. Spain got stuck with the blame because it was neutral during World War I and reported openly on the outbreak. Countries fighting the war censored bad news to protect morale, so their newspapers stayed quieter while Spanish papers covered the epidemic honestly, including the illness of the king. The rest of the world saw Spain talking about the disease and basically decided, well, obviously it must be Spanish. Brilliant detective work, everyone. Spain's reward for transparency was being branded as the source of a pandemic. The name stuck not because Spain caused it, but because Spain was one of the few places not aggressively hiding it. Public memory often punishes the person who tells the truth first. 15. The fall of the Berlin Wall is usually told like democracy kicked the door open and communism gracefully collapsed under the weight of destiny. The real opening moment was much more ridiculous. On November 9, 1989, East German official Günter Schabowski answered questions at a live press conference and fumbled the details of a new travel policy. He accidentally made it sound like border restrictions were ending immediately. That was not exactly the careful plan, because even collapsing regimes apparently still love scheduling. Crowds rushed toward the checkpoints. Guards waited for clear orders. Clear orders never arrived. And nobody wanted to become the guy who opened fire because a bureaucrat had mangled a memo on television. East Germany was already falling apart, but the famous border opening began with one official saying the wrong thing into a microphone. History does enjoy a paperwork disaster. 16. The Aztec Empire was not conquered by a few hundred Spaniards operating alone like a tiny armored superhero team with horses and mustaches. Hernán Cortés arrived with a relatively small Spanish force, but he also built alliances with tens of thousands of indigenous warriors, especially groups like the Tlaxcalans, who had very real reasons to hate Aztec domination, tribute demands, and imperial violence. Add epidemic disease, local politics, siege warfare, internal tension, and ruthless opportunism, and the old heroic Spanish version starts looking very fake. This was not a handful of Europeans defeating an empire through pure genius, steel, and dramatic facial hair. The Spaniards inserted themselves into existing indigenous conflicts and exploited them with devastating results. Their weapons, horses, and tactics mattered. But without native allies, they did not have the manpower to bring the empire down. The real conquest was messier, uglier, and much less flattering. 17. Witch hunts are shoved into the Middle Ages so often that people imagine medieval villages burning witches between harvest festivals and goat-related complaints. But the biggest waves of witch trials and executions happened later, especially in the 16th and 17th centuries. Early medieval church teaching often treated stories about night-flying witches and secret magical gatherings as superstition or delusion, not confirmed fact. This does not mean medieval Europe was a paradise of calm reason, so let us not get carried away. But the full witch hunt machine people picture belongs mostly to the Renaissance and early modern era. Europe became more literate, more bureaucratic, and very confident in its own intelligence, then used that confidence to hunt imaginary satanic networks. Once judges, theologians, and local authorities accepted witches as an organized threat, paranoia sprinted downhill. The worst panic came when society was supposedly getting smarter. History loves irony with casualties. 18. The Boston Tea Party was not instantly adored by every American patriot as a sacred and flawless protest. At the time, it was controversial. Some important revolutionary figures thought destroying private property was reckless and politically dangerous. George Washington disliked the damage, and Benjamin Franklin even argued that the East India Company should be paid back for the ruined tea. Later memory polished the event into a clean symbol of brave resistance because it is dramatic, visual, and easy to celebrate. Men in disguises dumping tea into a harbor is much easier to mythologize than a messy argument about taxation, representation, corporate monopoly, and colonial law. Some colonists saw courage. Others saw vandalism that could bring brutal punishment. Both reactions made sense. The Tea Party was bold, important, and explosive. It was not one giant patriotic agreement with tea-flavored special effects. 19. Benjamin Franklin was never president of the United States, no matter what the $100 bill keeps whispering to confused brains everywhere. He was a printer, writer, inventor, scientist, diplomat, political strategist, and one of the most important figures of the American founding era. But he never sat in the presidential chair. Franklin's power came from other places. He shaped revolutionary ideas, became a crucial diplomat in France, built international fame, and turned himself into the kind of public genius everyone wanted near the discussion table. He was founding father royalty, just not presidential royalty. The confusion survives because people assume that if someone is famous enough to appear on a major money, he must have been president. Franklin achieved something stranger. He became so central to the national story that popular memory basically promoted him to an office he never held. 20. Bushido is often described as an ancient, perfectly fixed samurai code that every warrior followed like a sword-carrying robot with honor software installed. Reality was messier, because reality always shows up with mud on its shoes. Samurai across different centuries behaved like military elites everywhere. Sometimes brave, sometimes loyal, sometimes treacherous, often practical, and very interested in power and survival. The clean version of Bushido as one timeless moral system was shaped much later, especially during more peaceful periods when people could romanticize warriors without being personally stabbed by them. Later writers, teachers, and nationalists polished samurai ethics into a neat package that made the warrior class look more elegant than history usually allows. Honor mattered. Loyalty mattered. So did ambition, betrayal, politics, and winning. Real samurai were not floating philosophy quotes with katanas. Bushido, as many imagine it, is tradition mixed with nostalgia and excellent branding. 21. For a long time, the Black Death was blamed almost entirely on rats, as if Europe had been defeated by one giant rodent conspiracy with fleas in management. Rats probably mattered in some places, but the classic version is far too tidy. Modern research suggests plague may have spread so quickly across Europe, not only through rat fleas, but also through parasites living directly on humans, especially body lice and human fleas. Yes, the nightmare may not have been just rats scurrying off ships. It may also have been hiding in people's clothing, which feels like history personally attacking your laundry. Trade routes, crowded towns, sanitation problems, weather, travel, and disease ecology all helped the disaster move. So the image of rats single-handedly destroying Europe is a dramatic oversimplification. The truth is messier, more human, and somehow even more disgusting, which is not an improvement. 22. The Roman Empire was not one giant Latin-only zone where everyone from Britain to Egypt spoke like a stone inscription in a courtroom. Rome was multilingual, and Greek was hugely important, especially in the Eastern Mediterranean. Latin mattered in government, law, military affairs, and administration across many regions. But Greek dominated culture, philosophy, education, and everyday communication in much of the East. Even rich Romans in the West often learned Greek because it was the language of educated sophistication, or at least the language of sounding unbearable at dinner. In Eastern provinces, Greek was often what people actually used. Rome ruled too many peoples, cities, traditions, and older cultures to be linguistically neat. It was powerful, not simple. Think of the empire as Latin on official documents, Greek in intellectual life, and countless local languages refusing to vanish just because Rome built nice roads. 23. Medieval nobles were not dumping priceless spices onto rotten meat to hide the smell, because that would be culinary idiocy at luxury prices. Spices like pepper, cinnamon, cloves, and nutmeg were expensive imports. If you were rich enough to coat food in them, you were usually rich enough to buy meat that had not started its personal journey toward becoming a criminal investigation. People used spices because they tasted good, showed status, and allowed rich hosts to turn dinner into a financial flex. Showing off through food is one of humanity's oldest hobbies. Was food storage harder before refrigeration? Obviously. Did people sometimes eat questionable things? Also yes, but aristocrats were not wasting imported pepper as deodorant for a dead roast. The rotten meat story mostly comes from later people imagining the past as one endless hygiene disaster. Spices were about flavor, prestige, and display, not emergency perfume for spoiled beef. 24. The Declaration of Independence is tied to July 4th, 1776. But that does not mean every famous signature appeared on the parchment that day in one glorious patriotic autograph party. Congress approved the final text on July 4th, which is why the date became America's national birthday. But the large parchment copy people picture was mostly signed later, with August 2nd commonly treated as the main signing date. Some delegates added their names even after that. So the dramatic image of everyone gathering on July 4th and signing in perfect revolutionary unity is more national memory theater than reality. The 4th marks approval, not the complete signing event. To be fair, July 4th sounds much stronger than early August paperwork follow-up. One of America's sacred origin moments involved edits, approvals, delays, and signatures added over time. History really enjoys ruining clean posters. 25. The Great Wall of China was not built as one tidy mega project where ancient engineers said, "Let us stop every invader forever," and then solved border security. It was a long, uneven patchwork of walls, forts, watchtowers, and barriers built, repaired, abandoned, rebuilt, and reimagined by different states and dynasties across roughly 2,000 years. Some parts were brick, others were stone, and many were rammed earth. Some sections did not even connect in the clean way maps make people imagine. And no, it was not an unbeatable nomad-proof force field. Sometimes it helped with defense, patrols, warnings, and controlling movement. Sometimes enemies went around it, broke through it, or used the ancient classic known as bribing the gatekeepers. The wall mattered. But it was less one perfect wall and more centuries of governments muttering, "Maybe more wall fixes this." 26. Julius Caesar was almost certainly not born by cesarean section, even though the name connection feels suspiciously convenient. His mother, Aurelia, survived his birth and lived for decades afterward, which is a major problem for the myth. In the ancient world, cutting a baby from a living mother was not a routine hospital procedure with calm nurses and paperwork. It was usually associated with cases where the mother was dying or already dead. Ancient surgery was brave, brutal, and absolutely not something you casually booked after breakfast. So the idea that Caesar personally gave the operation its name is probably wrong. The connection likely comes from older Latin terms related to cutting or from Roman legal traditions about removing a child from the womb. Later, people heard Caesar and Caesarean and thought history had gift-wrapped the perfect origin story. It had not. Roman medicine was much uglier than the wordplay. 27. Native Americans did not casually sell Manhattan for $24 in beads like they got fooled by the worst real estate agent in world history. The $24 figure is a later conversion of the reported value of trade goods, not a literal cash price. The goods likely included useful items like metal tools, cloth, and kettles, not just shiny nonsense. More importantly, many indigenous communities did not understand land ownership in the same permanent, exclusive European way. An agreement might mean shared use, access, alliance, or permission, not "please take this island forever and eventually fill it with finance bros." The two sides may not even have believed they were making the same kind of deal. The myth makes colonization sound clever, clean, and harmless. The reality involved different concepts of land, obligation, power, and coercion, with consequences that were anything but simple. 28. Mount Rushmore is now sold as a grand patriotic shrine, as if the mountain woke up one morning and demanded presidential faces. The origin was far less sacred and much more, "Please come spend money in South Dakota." Historian Doane Robinson promoted the idea mainly to attract tourists and their beautiful wallets. At first, he was not even focused on presidents. He imagined Western heroes and regional figures, something with strong roadside attraction energy before it became national destiny in stone. Then, sculptor Gutzon Borglum entered the project and pushed it toward something bigger, more symbolic, and much more presidential. Over time, patriotism wrapped around it like a flag blanket. But the starting energy was tourism marketing with a chisel. And because it was carved in the Black Hills, land sacred to the Lakota, the polished national story becomes much less comfortable. Mount Rushmore was not born holy. It was branded into holiness. 29. The Bermuda Triangle is not a supernatural blender where ships and planes vanish at cursed luxury rates. Statistically, it is not wildly more dangerous than other heavily traveled parts of the ocean. Accidents happen there because lots of traffic passes through. Weather can be brutal, navigation mistakes are real, mechanical failures happen, and the ocean has never needed ghosts to be terrifying. The mystery exploded in the 20th century because sensational writers bundled dramatic incidents together, ignored boring explanations, stretched details, and turned tragedy into a marketable brand. That is the classic recipe. Take real cases, remove context, add spooky music in your brain, and suddenly geography has a conspiracy. The Bermuda Triangle is basically a normal patch of ocean with elite public relations. The myth survives because people want the map to contain at least one place where logic clocks out early. 30. Prohibition did not make alcohol itself illegal in the United States, which is the kind of detail that ruins the simple classroom version. The law banned the manufacture, sale, and transportation of intoxicating liquor. If you already had bottles at home before Prohibition began, you could legally keep drinking them. Doctors could prescribe alcohol for medical reasons because apparently whiskey was still allowed to wear a lab coat. Religious groups could keep using wine in ceremonies. Wealthy people stocked private cellars in advance because rich people have never met a loophole they did not want to frame above the fireplace. So America did not technically outlaw drinking. It attacked the supply chain. The result was not national sobriety. It was bootleggers, speakeasies, smugglers, fake prescriptions, and organized crime with excellent customer service. Prohibition did not erase alcohol. It made alcohol risky, theatrical, and extremely profitable. 31. The Trojan Horse is the most famous military trick ever told, which is awkward because it probably is not history in the strict sense. The story comes from myth, poetry, and epic tradition, not reliable battlefield reporting filed live from outside Troy. Some historians think the horse may have symbolized something else. Maybe it pointed to an earthquake, since Poseidon was linked with both horses and earth-shaking. Maybe it reflected a siege engine, like a battering ram. Or maybe ancient storytellers simply realized that a giant wooden horse full of soldiers was too unforgettable to leave out. Troy may well have fallen after a real conflict, but the famous details are buried under legend, symbolism, and centuries of storytelling upgrades. The horse survives because it is narrative gold. It just is not the kind of evidence historians love unless they enjoy being side-eyed at conferences. 32. People in the past did not all collapse dead at 30, even though lifespan averages make ancient adults sound like they were collecting senior discounts at 27. The confusion comes from infant and child mortality. When many children die young, the average age at death drops sharply, even if lots of people who survive childhood live into their 50s, 60s, or beyond. Ancient and medieval societies absolutely had old people. They had gray hair, bad knees, grandchildren, grudges, and unsolicited advice because some human traditions are eternal. Life was harsher than today, yes. Disease, famine, childbirth, accidents, and violence killed many people early. But surviving the dangerous early years greatly improved your odds. The myth survives because averages sound scientific while hiding the real shape of the data. The past was not full of 30-year-old grand elders. Statistics are just very good at lying politely. So yes, your history teacher may have accidentally installed a few bugs in your brain, not maliciously, hopefully, just with confidence, chalk dust, and terrifyingly outdated worksheets. If this video corrected at least one fact you were ready to defend in public, hit like and subscribe before another textbook gets away with it. And now, for the dangerous part. What is the dumbest history lie we did not include? Drop it in the comments, but come armed with evidence because the comment section is about to become a courtroom with Wi-Fi.